The old digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. I stared at the red numbers, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Sleep was a distant country I couldn't find a visa for. Outside, the familiar sounds of Havenwood, the distant hum of the highway, the rustle of leaves in the oak tree outside my window, were just a thin veneer over the silence of the house. It had been 3 days since the incident in the woods, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. The glint of teeth, the spray of saliva, the impossible, bone-cracking shift of my best friend's body. My friendship with Tom was an anomaly in our small town. I was just a regular kid, dealing with the usual trials of being a 17-year-old junior at Havenwood High. Calculus homework, trying to avoid the attention of the football team's more aggressive linebackers, and figuring out what to do with my life. Tom was different. He lived with his family in the Whisperwood Collective, a sprawling, self-sufficient village deep in the national forest that bordered our town. They were the town's local mystery. They kept to themselves, grew their own food, and homeschooled their kids. No one really knew much about them, other than that they didn't appreciate visitors. Trespassers were met by stern-faced men and escorted firmly back to the property line. But Tom wasn't homeschooled. His father, a man with eyes that seemed to see right through you, had decided Tom needed to understand the outside world. So he was enrolled at Havenwood High as a freshman, a stranger in a strange land. He was quiet, observant, and had a way of moving through the crowded hallways that was almost predatory in its grace. We ended up as lab partners in biology, dissecting a frog. I'd made some stupid joke about the frog's love life, and for the first time, I saw him genuinely smile. After that, we were inseparable. He taught me how to track deer and identify edible plants. I taught him the complexities of video games and why pizza was the perfect food. We were brothers, in a way that went deeper than just friendship. That afternoon, 3 days ago, was supposed to be like any other. School let out and the sun was warm on our backs. "Want to check those traps I set by Miller's Creek?" Tom had asked, his voice low and calm as always. "Sure, man," I'd said, hoisting my backpack higher. "Think you caught anything bigger than a squirrel this time?" He'd smirked. "You never know." The woods were our sanctuary. The deeper we went, the more the sounds of the town faded, replaced by the whispering wind and the chatter of unseen animals. We walked for maybe a mile, the path growing faint until it disappeared altogether, but Tom navigated the forest as if it were his own backyard. We were in a small clearing, the creek gurgling nearby, when the air changed. The birds went silent. An oppressive weight settled over the woods, a stillness that felt heavy and wrong. "Tom," I whispered, my hand freezing over the snare he was inspecting. He was already on his feet, his head cocked, scanning the dense tree line. "Get behind me," he said, his voice a low growl I'd never heard before. And then it came. It wasn't a subtle entrance. A massive black bear, bigger than any I'd ever seen in pictures, exploded from the undergrowth. It was a solid wall of muscle and fur, its roar tearing through the silence and vibrating in my bones. Its lips were pulled back, revealing yellowed teeth coated in drool. Its small black eyes were fixed on us, burning with a primal rage. My mind went blank. This was it. There was nowhere to run. We were 2 teenage boys against 400 pounds of fury. I was vaguely aware of a warm wetness spreading down my jeans. The bear charged. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing. I saw every detail, the way its claws tore up the earth, the swing of its massive head. I thought of my mom, of the unfinished history paper on my desk. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact, for the tearing of flesh. But it never came. Instead, I heard a sound that was even more terrifying than the bear's roar. It was a guttural snarl, a symphony of tearing fabric and popping, snapping bones. My eyes flew open. Tom was on the ground, but he was convulsing, changing. His limbs elongated, his face pushed forward into a snout, fur erupting from his skin. His spine arched, and with a final sickening crunch, he was no longer Tom. Where my friend had stood was a wolf. But it was no ordinary wolf. It was huge, its fur the color of midnight, its eyes glowing with a faint, amber light. It stood easily as high as the bear's shoulder, a creature of nightmare and legend. The bear unbelievably skidded to a halt. It seemed confused, its rage momentarily replaced by uncertainty. The wolf didn't hesitate. It launched itself forward, a black missile of teeth and claws. The two beasts collided with a sound like a car crash. They were a whirlwind of fury, a chaos of snarling, biting, and clawing. The wolf was faster, more agile. It ducked under the bear's swiping paws, its jaws snapping at the larger animal's legs and flanks. The bear roared in pain and frustration, spinning in place, unable to land a solid blow. I was paralyzed, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. Tom was a monster. A werewolf. The kind of thing you see in movies, not the kind of thing that saves you from a bear in the middle of the woods. The fight ended as quickly as it began. The wolf landed a deep bite on the bear's shoulder. The bear let out a pained bellow, shook its massive head, and then, with a final defeated look, it turned and crashed back into the woods, leaving a trail of broken branches and blood in its wake. The wolf stood panting in the center of the clearing, its sides heaving. Then it turned its head and looked at me. Those glowing amber eyes, filled with an intelligence that was both terrifying and familiar, met mine. It took a hesitant step toward me and I flinched, scrambling backward until my back hit a tree. The transformation back was just as gruesome. The creature shuddered, its form seeming to collapse in on itself. Bones broke and reformed with wet cracks. The fur receded. And then, lying naked and gasping on the forest floor was Tom. My friend, Tom. He pushed himself into a sitting position, his body covered in sweat and dirt. You saw, he breathed, his voice raw. I could only nod, my throat too tight to form words. I'm sorry, he said, looking at the ground. I didn't want you to find out this way. He looked up, and the desperation in his eyes was heartbreaking. You can't tell anyone, man. Please. They wouldn't understand. My family, they'd have to leave. Or worse. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But looking at him, so vulnerable and scared, something else pushed through. This was Tom. The same guy who had helped me cram for a Spanish test, who had laughed until he cried at that stupid comedy movie we saw last month. Monster or not, he was my friend. I won't, I finally managed to say, my voice a croak. I won't tell anyone, I swear. His secret was safe with me. I just didn't realize that by knowing it, I had painted a target on my own back. The silence of my bedroom was a taut drum skin, and my own breathing was the frantic, irregular beat. For 2 nights, I'd lain awake. The image of Tom's transformation burned onto the backs of my eyelids. It was a secret so heavy it felt like a physical weight in my chest. By the 3rd night, exhaustion was finally starting to win. My thoughts grew fuzzy, and the edges of the room began to soften. I was drifting into a shallow, uneasy sleep when I heard it. A soft thud from downstairs. My eyes snapped open. The house was supposed to be empty. My mom was a nurse, working a double shift at the hospital. I strained my ears, telling myself it was just the house settling, or a branch against the window. Then I heard a floorboard creak in the hallway right outside my bedroom door. A cold, electric jolt shot through me. I wasn't alone. I held my breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Slowly, silently, the doorknob began to turn. I didn't even have time to scream. The door swung open and 3 figures filled the frame, dark silhouettes against the dim light of the hall. They moved with an unnerving speed and silence. Before I could even push myself up, a large, rough hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my cry. Another pair of hands grabbed my arms, hauling me out of bed with effortless strength. I thrashed wildly, kicking and struggling, but it was like fighting against statues. One of them pressed a cloth into my face. It was coarse and smelled of burlap and damp earth. A gag. He tied it tightly behind my head, the knot digging into my scalp. They didn't say a word. The silence was more terrifying than any threat could have been. They half dragged, half carried me through my own house, my bare feet stumbling on the floor. They moved with a practiced efficiency, like they had done this 100 times before. Down the stairs, through the kitchen, and out the back door into the cool night air. A dark-colored pickup truck was parked in the driveway, its engine off, its lights dark. They threw open the rear door and tossed me inside like a sack of garbage. The door slammed shut, plunging me into absolute blackness. I landed hard on the cold metal floor, the impact jarring my teeth. The truck's suspension groaned as they climbed into the cab. The engine rumbled to life, and we were moving, pulling out of my driveway and leaving my safe, normal life behind. I lay there in the dark, my mind reeling with terror and confusion. Who were these people? What did they want? The only answer that made any sense was the most impossible one. Tom's family. The collective. They knew that I knew. The ride was long and bumpy, jostling me with every turn and rut in the road. I had no idea where we were going, but I knew we had left the paved streets of Havenwood far behind. The smell of pine and wet dirt seeped through the cracks in the truck. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the truck slowed and came to a stop. The engine cut out and the sudden silence was deafening. I heard the cab doors open and close. A moment later, my door was wrenched open, and the dim, flickering light of torches flooded in, blinding me. Hands grabbed me again, pulling me out onto soft earth. I blinked, my eyes struggling to adjust. I was in a village, but it was unlike any place I had ever seen. I stood on the edge of a large, circular clearing surrounded by dozens of log houses. They were huge, built from massive, dark timbers with steeply pitched roofs. There were no electric lights, no street lamps. The entire village was illuminated by the warm, dancing light of torches set in iron brackets on the walls of the houses. The air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat. It was beautiful, in a primal, intimidating way. In front of each of the larger houses stood a massive totem pole, intricately carved into the likeness of an animal. A fierce wolf with bared teeth, a stoic bear standing on its hind legs, a cunning-looking raven with wings outstretched. My captors shoved me forward, forcing me to walk toward the center of the village, where a wide, open plaza had been cleared. The entire community was gathered there, their faces illuminated by a large central bonfire. Men, women, children, all of them stood in silence, their eyes fixed on me. They wore simple clothes of leather and homespun cloth, and their faces were hard, weathered, and unreadable. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. In the center of the plaza was a thick wooden post driven deep into the ground. They dragged me to it, my feet scuffing in the dirt, and began tying my wrists to the rough wood with thick rope. My terror had solidified into a cold, hard knot of dread in my stomach. This was it. They were going to kill me for what I knew. When I was secured, a man stepped out from the crowd. He was old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his long white hair tied back in a leather cord. He wore a cloak of dark feathers, and his eyes, even from a distance, seemed to possess a piercing wisdom. He walked slowly, deliberately, until he stood before me. He was clearly the leader, the elder. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. The entire village was silent, waiting. "You have seen what you should not have seen," he said, his voice deep and raspy, carrying easily across the plaza. "The boy was foolish. He broke a sacred law to save you. Now that knowledge puts us all at risk." I tried to speak, but the gag only allowed a muffled grunt. "You have seen our truth," the elder continued, his voice echoing in the night. "Because of this, you are left with two paths. Only two." He held up two fingers. "You can become an ally to the people, or—" He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, he slowly, deliberately, drew a single finger across his own throat. The message was unmistakable. My blood ran cold. Ally? What did that even mean? I must have looked confused because he elaborated. An ally is a bridge, a conduit between our world and yours. You will live your life, but you will belong to us. You will keep our secrets. You will speak for us when we need a voice in your world, and you will, from time to time, perform tasks for the good of the people. In exchange, he said, his voice dropping slightly, you will be allowed to live, and you will be under our protection. It is a bond for life. There is no other way. It wasn't a choice. It was a death sentence or a life sentence. My mind raced. A life of service to these creatures? But the alternative was no life at all. I looked out at the sea of stone-faced people, at the flickering torches and the animal totems that seemed to watch me with carved eyes. I had no choice. I never did. I nodded my head vigorously, my eyes wide. Yes, I'll do it. Yes. A flicker of something, maybe satisfaction, maybe approval, crossed the elder's face. He gave a sharp nod and two men stepped forward. One of them cut the gag from my mouth while the other began to untie my wrists. I sagged against the post, my legs trembling too much to hold me up. You have chosen wisely, the elder said. But a bond must be sealed. It must be marked. Before I could ask what he meant, another man approached from the bonfire. He held a long iron rod, the end of which glowed a malevolent cherry red. My stomach plummeted. They were going to brand me. I tried to pull away, but the men who had untied me held my arms in an iron grip, pulling the sleeve of my t-shirt up to my shoulder. The mark of the ally is the mark of the mother, the elder said, his voice taking on a reverent tone. She who gave us the gift of the change. The man with the iron pressed the glowing end against the soft flesh of my left shoulder. The pain was searing, immediate, and absolute. A strangled scream tore from my throat as the smell of my own burning skin filled my nostrils. It lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. When he pulled the iron away, a wave of nausea and dizziness washed over me. On my shoulder, angry and red, was a stylized symbol of a bird with its wings spread, as if in flight. A brand. A claim of ownership. "It is done," the elder declared to the crowd. "He is one of us now, a friend on the outside. He will carry our mark and our trust." He turned back to me, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Go home. The ones who brought you here will see you return. Remember your oath. The people do not forget." The two men hoisted me to my feet and led me, stumbling and disoriented, back to the pickup truck. As they drove away, I looked back at the village, a secret, impossible world of fire and shadow, now a permanent part of my life, seared not just into my memory but into my very skin. The next day at school felt like a bizarre dream. The familiar hallways, the slam of lockers, the drone of the morning announcements. It was all so painfully normal. It made the night's events feel even more insane. My shoulder throbbed with a dull, persistent ache beneath my shirt, a constant reminder that it wasn't a nightmare. The brand was real. I felt like a ghost, walking through my old life, but no longer a part of it. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every stranger's glance felt like a knowing stare. I saw Tom by his locker. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he held himself with a tense, coiled energy. When he saw me, a look of profound relief and guilt washed over his face. He quickly pulled me into an empty classroom, shutting the door behind us. "Man, I am so sorry," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "I didn't know they were going to do that. I mean, I knew they'd have to talk to you, but not like that. The kidnapping part. They branded me, Tom," I said, my voice flat. I couldn't keep the tremor of anger out of it. "They dragged me out of my bed and branded me like cattle." He flinched, unable to meet my eyes. "I know. It's an old tradition. An extreme one. It was a test. A scare tactic. My father and the elder were furious I let you see me change. They said it was the only way to be sure you'd understand how serious this is." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "They were just being theatrical. You're not in any danger. I promise. As long as you keep the secret and help out when they ask, you'll be fine. More than fine. The people, my tribe, they don't forget their debts or their allies." I wanted to stay angry, to yell at him, but looking at his genuinely distressed face, some of my rage fizzled out. He was caught in the middle of this, just like I was. "Help out how?" I asked, my voice edged with suspicion. "Small things," he said quickly. "Maybe pick something up from a store in town they can't get. Or let us know if you hear about forestry services planning a survey near our territory. Simple stuff. You're our eyes and ears out here." He took a breath. "Look, I know this is a lot. After school, come with me. Back to the village. I want you to see it in the daylight. To see that we're not just monsters." A part of me wanted to run in the opposite direction and never look back, but a larger, more curious part of me couldn't refuse. I had a bird burned into my shoulder. My life was already tangled up with theirs, whether I liked it or not. I might as well see what I'd gotten myself into. "Fine," I said. "After school." When the final bell rang, we walked into the woods, taking the same path we had just days before. But this time, there was no fear, only a strange anticipation. The deeper we went, the more I felt like I was crossing a border into another country. We passed a large, moss-covered boulder, and Tom veered off the faint trail. After another 10 minutes of walking through dense forest, the trees suddenly opened up, and we were there. In the daylight, the village was even more impressive. The log houses were masterpieces of craftsmanship, their timbers fitting together perfectly. The central plaza was bustling with activity. Women sat on porches mending clothes or weaving baskets. Men were chopping wood, their axes ringing out in a steady rhythm. Children chased each other through the dirt streets, their laughter echoing in the air. It looked normal, a rustic, off-the-grid community. But the totems standing guard in front of the main houses were a stark reminder that this place was anything but normal. "So, what's with the giant carvings?" I asked, nodding toward the nearest one, a snarling cougar. "They're not just carvings," Tom explained, his voice filled with a quiet pride. "They represent the family. The tribe is made up of different families, different bloodlines. Each family has a connection to a specific animal spirit." He pointed to the cougar totem. "That's the home of the Shadow Prowler family. They can change into cougars." He gestured across the plaza. "You see the bear totem? The Stone Paw family? The raven totem over there is for the Sky Watchers." "And your house?" I asked. He smiled and pointed to the largest house, the one that sat at the head of the plaza, directly opposite the entrance. Its totem was the magnificent, snarling wolf I'd seen the other night. The Night Runners, that's us. It was starting to make sense. A whole society of shapeshifters, organized by clans. We walked slowly through the village and people nodded at Tom, their gazes lingering on me with open curiosity, but no hostility. A delicious smell wafted from a large communal fire pit, where several women were stirring massive pots. "What are they cooking?" I asked. "Food for the feast," Tom said, his eyes lighting up. "The trials are coming up." "The trials?" "Yeah, it's a competition we hold every 10 years, he explained. "To choose the next elder. The current one, the old man who talked to you, his name is Elon. His time is ending. The trials test strength, speed, and combat. Each family puts forward their best champion. Whichever family's champion wins the most, events gets to have their patriarch or matriarch lead the tribe for the next decade. It's a huge honor." He grinned. "My older brother Caleb is competing for our family. He's going to win it all this year." The idea was mind-boggling. A supernatural Olympics to decide the ruler of a secret society of were-creatures. "So the whole village is involved in this?" "Everyone," Tom confirmed. "It's the biggest thing we do. The first trial is tomorrow. The Great Run." He looked at me, a hopeful expression on his face. "You should come watch. As an ally, you're welcome here. It would be good for people to see you to get used to you being around." The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. To witness something like that firsthand, a secret world opening up right in front of me. This was so far beyond the scope of anything I had ever imagined for my life. But the fear was being replaced by a powerful, undeniable curiosity. I was already marked. I was already part of this, in a way. I might as well see the show. "Yeah," I heard myself say. "Okay, I'll be here." Tom's smile was genuine and relieved. "Awesome. You won't regret it." I wasn't so sure about that, but as we stood there in the heart of the impossible village, I knew one thing for certain. My boring, predictable life was over. The next afternoon I returned to the village, my stomach a knot of nervous excitement. The atmosphere was completely different. The calm, domestic bustle of the previous day had been replaced by a thrumming, festival-like energy. The plaza was packed with people, all of them moving in a single direction, out of the village and into the woods beyond. They carried crude flags on long poles, each bearing the symbol of their family's animal. Banners with wolves, bears, eagles, and even stranger creatures fluttered in the breeze. Tom found me at the edge of the crowd, his face flushed with excitement. "Glad you made it. Come on, you don't want to miss the start." He led me through the throng of people to a massive, sprawling meadow I hadn't seen before. It was at least a mile long, a wide slash of green bordered by dense forest. The entire length of the field was marked with colorful flags, outlining a winding course. This was the arena for the first trial, a test of pure speed. At one end of the meadow, the champions were gathering. There were about a dozen of them, men and women, all in peak physical condition. They stood with their families, receiving last-minute words of encouragement. I saw Tom's brother Caleb, tall and broad-shouldered, standing with the Night Runner family. He had the same quiet intensity as Tom, but his was sharper, honed to a razor's edge. He met my gaze from across the field and gave a short, curt nod of acknowledgement. The elder, Elan, walked to the center of the starting line and raised his hands. A hush fell over the crowd. "Let the first trial begin," he boomed, his voice carrying across the meadow. "Champions, take your mark." What happened next stole the breath from my lungs. The champions lined up, and then, one by one, they began to change. It was a horrifying, spectacular sight. This wasn't a gentle, magical poof. It was a violent physical ordeal. Skin stretched and split, bones audibly cracked and reformed. Grunts and snarls of pain echoed across the field. In moments, the line of humans was gone, replaced by a row of terrifying, mythical beasts. They weren't just animals. They were something in between. Monstrous humanoids that stood on two legs. Caleb had transformed into a massive werewolf, just like the one Tom had become, but larger, more powerful, his muscles cording beneath a coat of jet-black fur. Beside him stood the Stone Paw champion, now a hulking man-bear, a bipedal mountain of brown fur and muscle. There was a were-cougar, sleek and dangerous, and a were-boar with wicked tusks curling up from its jaw. But the strangest, by far, were the snakes. The champion from the scale-kindred family had become a horrifying creature. He still stood on two legs, but his skin was covered in shimmering green scales. His face was flat and reptilian with a forked tongue flicking from his lipless mouth, and his arms had fused into long, serpentine appendages. He looked fundamentally wrong, a violation of nature. "The bears are our biggest rivals," Tom muttered beside me, his eyes fixed on the man-bear. "The Night Runners and the Stone Paws have been competing for leadership for generations. We don't like them. Elan raised a wooden rattle and shook it violently. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. The race began. The creatures exploded from the starting line in a shower of dirt and torn grass. The werewolf Caleb and the were-cougar immediately took the lead, their powerful legs eating up the ground in massive strides. This wasn't just a simple sprint. It was an obstacle course designed for monsters. The first challenge was a wide, muddy bog. The faster runners leaped over it, while the heavier ones, like the were-boar, simply plowed through it, sending arcs of thick black mud flying through the air. As they reached the far side of the bog, chaos erupted from the trees lining the course. Huge boulders came crashing down the hillside, aimed directly at the runners. "The bears!" Tom yelled, pointing. On a ridge above, several members of the Stone Paw family were heaving rocks down, a legal, if brutal, part of the competition designed to slow down their rivals. One of the smaller champions, a werefox, wasn't fast enough. A rock glanced off its shoulder, sending it tumbling to the ground with a pained yelp. Caleb, with incredible agility, dodged and weaved through the rockfall without losing speed. He was a blur of black fur, his focus absolute. The next section of the course was even more treacherous. As the racers entered a thin stretch of woods, arrows began to fly from the shadows. I couldn't see the archers, but their aim was wickedly precise. An arrow thudded into the thigh of the were-cougar, who roared in fury and pain, stumbling but continuing to run. It was brutal. This wasn't a game. It was a matter of pride and power, and they were willing to draw blood for it. The final obstacle was a sheer rock face, about 30 feet high. It was the great equalizer. The brute strength of the man-bear allowed it to find handholds and pull its massive frame up slowly but surely. The reptilian snake champion, however, slithered up the rock face with uncanny ease, its serpentine body finding purchase on the smallest cracks. But Caleb was something else. He didn't climb. He ran. Taking a running start, he bounded up the cliff, his claws finding purchase in the stone, propelling him upward in a series of powerful leaps. He crested the top moments before the bear and the snake. The finish line was now in sight, a straight 100-yard dash across the open field. The man-bear lumbered behind, its strength no match for the wolf's raw speed. It was a race between Caleb and the snake. The scaled creature ran with an awkward, lurching gait, but it was surprisingly fast. For a moment I thought it might catch him, but Caleb put on a final burst of speed. His powerful form flew across the grass, and he crossed the finish line a full body length ahead of the snake. A massive roar went up from the Night Runner family and their supporters. Tom was screaming himself hoarse next to me, jumping up and down. The trial was over. The wolf had won. Caleb transformed back, his body shuddering as it returned to its human form. He stood panting, covered in sweat and dirt, but his eyes blazed with triumph. The first victory belonged to the wolves. As I watched the other champions limp across the finish line, some bleeding, all exhausted, I realized the full gravity of what I was witnessing. This was a fierce and ancient tradition, and the competition for power within this secret world was as real and as dangerous as anything in my own. The victory of the wolf was cause for a grand celebration. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the valley, the village came alive with fire and sound. The central bonfire was built high, its flames leaping 20 feet into the air, painting the surrounding log houses in flickering orange and gold. The smell of roasting meat from the feast preparations was thick and savory, and the sounds of drums and joyous shouts echoed through the clearing. The Night Runner family had earned the first points in the trials, and they were going to make sure everyone knew it. Tom pulled me along toward the largest of the longhouses, the one with the great wolf totem. "Come on," he said, grinning. "You have to celebrate with us. You're an ally of the people, but you're a friend of the wolves." The inside of the Wolf Clan's longhouse was even more impressive than the outside. A single cavernous room stretched out before us, the ceiling held up by massive timber beams. The walls were adorned with wolf pelts, intricate carvings, and the family's history painted on tanned hides. A long, roaring fire pit ran down the center of the room, providing warmth and light. The entire family, the Night Runners, were gathered, their faces flushed with pride and excitement. Caleb stood near the fire, accepting congratulations from his kin. He looked up as we entered and motioned for us to come closer. "This is the friend you spoke of, brother?" Caleb asked, his voice a low rumble. He looked me up and down, his gaze intense. It wasn't hostile, but it was deeply searching, as if he were measuring my worth. "This is him," Tom said. "He saw the race. He's with us." Caleb offered me his hand. His grip was like iron. Then you are welcome in our home. Any friend of my brother's, any ally to the people, is a friend of the Night Runners." He gave a grim smile. "It was good to put the stone paws in their place today, but this is only the first trial. The bear that competed today, Borg, he is strong. He will win the trial of strength, I have no doubt. This will all come down to the final combat." The rivalry with the Bear clan was clearly a deep and bitter one, a central focus of their existence. The celebration was loud and wild. They passed around drinking horns filled with some kind of fermented honey mead, and the food was hearty and delicious. I felt a strange sense of belonging, sitting there among the werewolves, a human with a firebird branded on his shoulder. After a while, the noise and the heat of the longhouse became overwhelming. I stepped outside for a breath of cool night air. The main plaza was less crowded now, with most people celebrating in their family homes. My eyes were drawn to the building that stood in the very center of the village, a structure different from all the others. It wasn't a longhouse. It was circular, made of smooth white stones that seemed to glow in the firelight, and it had no windows. A single, heavy wooden door was its only visible entrance. Two stern-faced warriors from the Wolf clan stood guard outside it. "That's the temple," Tom said, having followed me out. "A temple? To what?" I asked. "To the Mother," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of reverence. He touched my shoulder, his finger tracing the air over my brand. "The symbol burned on your skin. That's her sigil. The Firebird. She was the first, the progenitor. Her blood flows in all of us, they say. She gave our people the gift of the change, the connection to our animal spirits." "So what's inside?" I asked, fascinated. "Artifacts, relics. The most important is the heart of the Mother. Well, no one is entirely sure what it is. A stone, a jewel, something else. It's the source of the Elder's power, what allows him to guide the people. It is our most sacred treasure." As he spoke, my gaze drifted past the temple. In the deep shadows between two longhouses, I saw movement. A small group of people were huddled together, whispering furtively. Their clothes were dark, and they kept glancing toward the temple, their movements nervous and quick. Judging by the green and black patterns on their leather tunics and their lean, sinuous builds, they were from the Scale kindred, the snake family. They saw me looking and instantly fell silent, melting back into the darkness. A prickle of unease went down my spine. They looked like they were up to no good, skulking around the most sacred place in the village. "What is it?" Tom asked, following my gaze. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Just thought I saw something." I didn't want to cast suspicion without being sure. It was probably nothing. Just a few people avoiding the boisterous celebrations. We turned and went back into the warmth of the longhouse. Back to the party. Caleb was telling a story of a great hunt, his voice booming through the hall, and the rest of the clan was hanging on his every word. I tried to push the image of the lurking snakes from my mind, tried to lose myself in the celebration of the wolves. But a small, cold seed of doubt had been planted. While the wolves and bears were locked in their open, head-to-head rivalry, it seemed another, more subtle conflict was slithering in the shadows. The festive mood of the previous night had vanished, replaced by a thick, ugly tension that hung over the village like a shroud. I arrived the next day to find not celebration, but hushed, angry clusters of people. A low murmur of accusation filled the air. Tom found me, his face grim and pale. "What's going on?" I asked. "It's terrible," he said, his voice low. "They found someone this morning, dead." A chill went through me. "Dead? How?" "Murdered," Tom said grimly. It was Flynn, one of the champions, from the Digclaw family, the raccoons. I remembered their champion from the race, a nimble but small creature. They found him behind their longhouse. His neck was snapped. Tom continued, leading me toward the center of the plaza where a crowd had gathered. Everyone's blaming the bears. We pushed our way to the edge of the crowd. In the center stood Borg, the massive bear champion, his face a mask of defiant anger. Opposite him stood Caleb and several other wolves, their expressions dark and accusatory. The elder, Elan, stood between them, his hands raised for calm. "I saw you," a wolf snarled, pointing a finger at Borg. "You and Flynn were arguing yesterday after the race. He was angry about the rock slide." "We argued, yes." Borg's voice was a deep bellow of outrage. "The little scavenger accused my family of deliberately targeting the smaller champions. He said we threw rocks at everyone but aimed to miss the snake. It was a foolish accusation, nothing more. We settled it with words. I did not lay a hand on him." But the wolves weren't convinced. The old rivalry was too deep, the suspicion too immediate. "Lies," Caleb shot back. "You hate to lose. You couldn't stand that the wolves took the first trial, so you took out your anger on a weaker opponent to send a message." The argument escalated, angry shouts turning into threatening growls. The air crackled with the promise of violence. "Enough!" Elan's voice cut through the noise like a whip. "There will be no bloodshed based on suspicion." Borg gave his word, and until there is proof it will be honored. We will investigate this foul deed. But today the trials continue. The people need strength now more than ever. His words, spoken with absolute authority, quelled the immediate hostility, but the anger still simmered just beneath the surface. Reluctantly, the crowd broke apart, moving toward a different area of the village I hadn't yet seen. It was a wide, flat clearing dominated by a collection of massive, smooth river stones. They ranged in size from a large suitcase to the engine block of a car. This was the arena for the second trial, the test of strength. The rules were simple. Each champion had to lift the stones, starting with the smallest and progressing to the largest. Whoever could lift the heaviest stone would win the trial for their family. One by one, the champions approached the stones. The Were-Cougar and Were-Fox champions managed the first few before failing. Caleb, in his human form, managed to hoist a stone that must have weighed over 400 pounds, his muscles straining before he was forced to drop it. But this was a trial built for the bears. When it was Borg's turn, he approached the stones with a quiet confidence. He lifted the first few with what looked like minimal effort. He successfully lifted the stone that Caleb had failed, setting it down with a grunt. He then moved to the final, largest stone, a colossal piece of granite that looked utterly immovable. As the crowd's attention was fixed on Borg, my eyes drifted. I scanned the faces, my mind still on the murder, and then I saw them again. Near the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by the corner of a longhouse, were two men from the Scale kindred family, the Snakes. They weren't watching the trial. Their attention was focused elsewhere, back toward the center of the village, toward the windowless stone temple of the Mother. A knot of suspicion tightened in my gut. This was the second time I'd seen them acting strangely near the temple. While everyone else was distracted, they were watching the one place Tom said was the most heavily guarded. They exchanged a few quiet words. Then one of them began to slink away from the crowd, keeping to the shadows. It was the same man I had seen the night before. On instinct, I pulled back from the crowd and began to follow him. using the noise and the bodies as cover. He moved with a snake-like grace, silent and efficient. He was heading directly for the temple. I watched from behind a stack of firewood as he approached the back of the stone structure, a place that was out of sight of the 2 guards at the front door. He knelt down, running his hands along the base of the stone wall as if searching for something. A secret entrance? A weakness in the stone. Suddenly, one of the wolf guards from the front came around the side of the temple, making his patrol. He saw the snake instantly. "What are you doing here, Scale Kindred?" the guard demanded, his hand dropping to the hilt of the axe at his belt. The snake man shot to his feet, a look of surprise on his face. "Nothing," he hissed. "Just stretching my legs." "Stretch them somewhere else," the guard growled. "This ground is sacred. Be gone." The snake gave the guard a venomous look but complied, turning and walking away, melting back toward the crowd at the trial. I ducked back behind the firewood, my heart pounding. They were definitely up to something. They were probing the temple's defenses, waiting for an opportunity. I made my way back to the trial of strength just as a thunderous roar went up from the crowd. Borg stood, his face red with exertion, his entire body trembling. At his feet was the largest stone, which he had managed to lift clear off the ground for a few seconds before dropping it. He had won. The Stonepaw family had taken the second trial. The bears celebrated their victory, a defiant roar in the face of the wolves' accusations. The score was now tied. 1 victory for the wolf, 1 for the bear. The final trial, combat, would decide everything. But as I watched the triumphant bears and the scowling wolves, my mind wasn't on their rivalry. It was on the snakes, slithering in the shadows, and the secret they were so desperate to get their hands on. The morning of the final trial dawned gray and heavy, the sky a lid of bruised clouds. A palpable tension gripped the village. Today, a new elder would be chosen not by speed or strength alone, but by combat. Today, the long and bitter rivalry between the Night Runners and the Stonepaws would finally come to a head. The central plaza had been transformed. A circular arena, about 40 feet in diameter, had been roped off. The ground within had been raked smooth. The entire village was gathered around it, a silent, expectant wall of people. There were no banners today, no festive shouts. The mood was somber, respectful, and thick with anticipation. This was the most sacred and serious of the trials. I stood with Tom near the edge of the arena. He was a nervous wreck, his knuckles white as he gripped the rope. "Caleb has to win," he whispered, his eyes locked on his brother, who was stretching on the far side of the arena. "If the bears take leadership, they'll make life difficult for everyone who isn't one of them." The elder, Elan, stepped into the center of the ring. "The trials have given us 2 leading families," he announced, his voice carrying in the stillness. "The Night Runners, victorious in the Great Run. The Stonepaws, triumphant in the Trial of Stones. Now it comes to this, a final battle between their champions. The victor's family will guide the people for the next decade. Let the combat begin." Caleb, representing the wolves, and Borg, the champion of the bears, stepped into the arena. They faced each other, circling slowly, taking each other's measure. The rules of the final combat allowed them to use their transformed state. With a shared guttural roar, they both began to change. The crowd watched in rapt silence as Caleb's form twisted into the powerful black-furred werewolf, and Borg's expanded into the hulking, bipedal man-bear. The 2 monsters, the pinnacle of their respective bloodlines, stared each other down. The fight was explosive. The bear, Borg, charged forward, a mountain of muscle and rage, his massive claws swiping at the air. Caleb was faster. He ducked under the wild swing, his own claws raking across the bear's thick hide, drawing first blood. Borg roared in pain and fury, spinning and lashing out. He was stronger, but Caleb was more agile, a whirlwind of black fur and flashing teeth. He dodged, weaved, and landed quick, precise strikes, wearing the larger creature down. It was a brutal dance. The bear would charge, and the wolf would evade and counter. The ground was torn up by their claws, and the air was filled with their snarls. Borg managed to land a heavy blow, his fist catching Caleb in the side and sending him stumbling. The bear pressed his advantage, pinning the wolf to the ground, his massive jaws snapping just inches from Caleb's throat. For a horrifying moment, I thought it was over. But Caleb was a warrior. With a desperate surge of strength, he twisted, sinking his teeth deep into the bear's shoulder. Borg bellowed in agony, his grip loosening just enough for Caleb to squirm free. The wolf was back on his feet in an instant. He was bleeding now and breathing heavily, but his eyes burned with an unyielding fire. He saw an opening. As the bear lunged again, clumsy from pain, Caleb dropped low and drove his shoulder into the creature's knee. There was a sickening crack. The bear's leg buckled, and he crashed to the ground. Caleb was on him in a flash, one clawed foot on the bear's chest, his jaws at Borg's throat. The bear lay defeated, whimpering in pain. Caleb let out a long, triumphant howl that echoed across the plaza. He had won. The elder stepped forward, raising his hands. "The trial is over. The Night Runners are victorious." A cheer began to build from the crowd, but it was cut short by a frantic shout. One of the wolf guards, the same one who had chased off the snake from the temple, came sprinting into the plaza, his face pale with panic. "The temple!" he screamed, gasping for breath. "The temple has been robbed. The heart of the mother, it's gone." A wave of shock and horror washed over the village. The celebration died in their throats. Panic erupted. People began shouting, running, their victory forgotten in the face of this sacrilege. The most sacred artifact, the source of their elders' power, was stolen. In the midst of the chaos, a voice roared above the din. It was Borg, the defeated bear champion, pushing himself up on his good leg. He pointed a bloody claw, not at his rivals, but straight at me. "It was him!" Borg bellowed, his voice filled with pain and accusation. "The outsider! He is the only new face among us, the stranger! He came just as the trials began, and now our most holy relic is missing. He is the thief!" Every head turned. Every pair of eyes in the village, wolf, bear, cougar, raven, fixed on me. I was frozen in place, a deer caught in the headlights of an entire village's fear and anger. They were closing in, their faces twisting into masks of suspicion. "No!" Tom yelled, stepping in front of me. "He's been with me, he wouldn't do this." "He's an outsider!" another bear snarled. "How can you trust him?" Caleb, back in his human form, stepped forward. "He is an ally under my family's protection. We will not condemn him on your word alone, Borg." But the crowd was a nervous, angry mob. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of the chaos. The theft, the timing, it was too perfect. And then it hit me. The lurking, the whispering, the probing of the temple's defenses. It wasn't me. I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. It was the snakes, the scale kindred. I saw them. Last night and during the second trial, they were skulking around the temple trying to find a way in. They were waiting for everyone to be distracted. A murmur of doubt ran through the crowd. My accusation hung in the air. Elan, the elder, looked at me, his ancient eyes searching my face. "The Scale Kindred?" Caleb scanned the crowd. His eyes narrowed. "He's right," he said slowly, a look of dawning realization on his face. "Where are they? Where is the Snake Champion?" Everyone looked around. In the sea of faces, there was a conspicuous absence. The entire Scale Kindred family, from their champion to their children, was gone. They had vanished. A grim, terrible understanding settled over the plaza. "To their longhouse," Caleb commanded, his voice ringing with the authority of the new elder. "Now." A wave of cold, unified fury swept through the village. The rivalry between wolf and bear, the accusations against me, all of it was forgotten, replaced by a single burning purpose. Led by Caleb and a limping but determined Borg, the crowd moved as one body, a silent, menacing river of people flowing toward the section of the village where the Scale Kindred made their home. Their longhouse was smaller than that of the bears or wolves, decorated with shed snakeskins and carvings of coiling serpents. It was ominously silent, its heavy wooden door shut tight. Caleb stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Scale Kindred!" he roared, his voice booming in the tense quiet. "Show yourselves! Return what you have stolen!" There was no answer. The silence from within the longhouse was unnerving. "We know you are in there!" Borg bellowed, his voice a low growl of thunder. "Open this door, or we will open it for you!" Still, nothing. Caleb looked at Borg, and a grim understanding passed between the two former rivals. They were in this together now. "This is your only warning," Caleb shouted. The only response was the wind whistling through the eaves of the silent house. "So be it," Caleb muttered. He turned to the crowd. "Stand back." He and Borg, the wolf and the bear, lowered their shoulders and charged the door together. The massive wooden planks shuddered under the impact but held fast. They hit it again, the sound like a crack of thunder. On the third impact, the wooden bar on the inside splintered with a deafening crack, and the door flew inward, torn from its leather hinges. The instant the way was clear, the house exploded with activity. It wasn't people who came out. It was monsters. Half a dozen members of the Scale Kindred family, already in their horrifying bipedal serpent forms, poured out of the doorway. Their lipless mouths were open in silent hisses, and their snake-like arms, ending in sharp claws, were ready to strike. They moved with a terrifying, slithering speed, attacking the front of the crowd. Chaos erupted. The villagers, taken by surprise, roared in outrage. The primal instinct took over. All around me, people began to change. The air was filled with the sickening sounds of popping bones and tearing flesh. In seconds, the plaza was a swirling melee of humanoid beasts. Caleb, once again a massive black werewolf, met the charge of two serpent creatures, his claws and teeth a blur of motion. Borg, transforming into his man-bear form, swatted a snake man aside with a single, brutal sweep of his massive paw. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the wall of a nearby house, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't a trial. This was a war. The warriors of the wolf, bear, cougar, and other families formed a brutal front line, clashing with the treacherous snakes. The serpent creatures were fast, and their claws were coated in some kind of venom that sizzled where it touched. But they were outnumbered and outmatched in sheer brute force. The battle was short and vicious. The unified families fought with a desperate fury, fueled by the sacrilege of the temple's desecration. The snakes were overwhelmed, driven back, and subdued one by one. Their strange, humanoid forms were no match for the combined might of werewolves and werebears fighting side by side. Soon the last of the serpent warriors was pinned to the ground, and a tense quiet fell over the battlefield, broken only by the panting of the victors and the pained hisses of the defeated. The way into the longhouse was clear. Caleb, his fur matted with dark, venomous blood, transformed back into his human form. Borg did the same, wincing as he put weight on his injured leg. Their rivalry seemed a lifetime ago. "The rest of you, secure the prisoners," Caleb commanded, his voice radiating a newfound authority. "Borg, Tom, you're with me." He then looked directly at me. His gaze was hard, but it held no accusation. "You too. You saw them first. You will see this to the end." I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I followed the three of them, the new elder, his former rival and my best friend, through the splintered doorway and into the dark, musky interior of the Snake Clan's home. The air inside was thick and cloying, smelling of strange herbs and something else, something reptilian and ancient. We were walking into the serpent's nest to find what they had stolen and to uncover the truth behind their treason. The interior of the Snake Longhouse was a single large chamber, but it was nothing like the warm, communal hall of the Wolf Clan. The air was cold and damp. The walls were lined with cages containing live snakes of all sizes, their unblinking eyes following our every move. In the center of the room, a large black cauldron sat over a low, magical fire that burned with a sickly green flame, casting eerie, dancing shadows. Gathered around this cauldron were the elders of the Scale Kindred, their faces grim, their bodies draped in dark, scaled robes. They didn't seem surprised to see us. The head elder, a gaunt man with reptilian yellow eyes, looked up, his expression one of cold defiance. "So, the dogs and their pets have broken down our door," the snake elder hissed. "You have desecrated the temple of the Mother Zathis," Caleb growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You have stolen the heart. Give it back now, and perhaps the elder will show you mercy." A dry, rasping laugh escaped Zathis's lips. He gestured toward the cauldron. "Fools. You've been guarding a lie for generations." I peered into the cauldron. Nestled in a bed of smoldering herbs was not the jewel or stone I had imagined. It was an egg. A massive ovoid egg easily 3 feet long, its shell a swirling pattern of obsidian black and venomous green. It seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. The stolen artifact was an egg. "That is the heart of the mother," Caleb said, his voice laced with confusion. "Why would you cook it?" "That is not the egg of your precious firebird," Zathis sneered, his lips curling back from his teeth. "Your progenitor was a liar and a usurper. She defeated our mother, the Great Serpent, and trapped her last child in a state of slumber, passing it off as her own holy relic to be foolishly worshipped and guarded by her children. We have not stolen anything. We have reclaimed what is ours. We are not cooking it. We are hatching it. We are bringing back our true mother." Before Caleb or Borg could react to this blasphemy, Zathis and the other snake elders began to chant in a sibilant, alien language. The green fire under the cauldron flared and the egg in the center began to rock violently. "Stop them!" Caleb roared. He and Borg charged forward. The snake elders drew long, curved daggers and met their charge. The small chamber erupted into a desperate battle. But it was too late. A loud crack echoed through the room, silencing everyone. A fissure appeared on the surface of the huge egg. Then another, and another. The shell began to crumble inward. Everyone froze, staring at the hatching egg. With a final sickening crunch, a head burst forth. It was not a bird. It was a serpent. A monstrous, primordial serpent. Its scales the color of polished obsidian. Its eyes burning with ancient, malevolent intelligence. It was far larger than any snake I'd ever seen, its head alone the size of a wolf's. Zathis, the elder, let out a triumphant laugh. "She is here! Our mother has returned!" "We cannot fight it like this," Elon shouted. He turned to two of his guards. "Bring them." He approached the creature, his arms outstretched in worship. The great serpent's head swiveled, its burning eyes fixing on him. It opened its mouth, revealing rows upon rows of needle-sharp fangs. And then, with a speed that defied its size, it lunged forward and swallowed the snake elder whole. The triumphant expressions on the faces of the other scale kindred turned to ones of pure terror. This was not the loving progenitor they had envisioned. This was a mindless, ravenous engine of destruction. The monster, now free of its shell, continued to uncoil, its body impossibly long. It smashed the cauldron aside and devoured another of the screaming snake elders. Chaos erupted. Everyone, wolf, bear, and snake alike, scrambled for the splintered doorway. The creature was growing, its body expanding, its serpentine form filling the longhouse. It let out a piercing shriek that shattered the remaining cages, and the longhouse's roof began to groan and splinter under its size. We spilled out into the plaza, which was now a scene of utter pandemonium. The snake longhouse collapsed behind us as the monster, now easily 50 feet long and as thick as a tree trunk, burst free. It rose high into the air, its terrifying head swaying back and forth as it surveyed the village, its forked tongue tasting the air. Zathis was right. Ilan, the old elder, breathed, his face ashen with horror. He had arrived with other warriors. "We have been guarding the egg of the Yig Kral, the serpent that gnaws the world, the ancient enemy of the Firebird Mother." He turned to his people, his voice filled with a desperate urgency. "This creature cannot be allowed to live. It will consume everything." The bravest warriors of the village in their beast forms charged the monster, but it was a slaughter. The Yig Kral swatted werewolves aside with its tail and snatched werebears from the ground, swallowing them whole. "We cannot fight it like this," Elin shouted. He turned to two of his guards. "Bring them!" The guards ran to the now open temple and returned a moment later carrying a long wooden chest. Elan threw it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of red velvet, were two weapons of terrifying beauty. They were gauntlets, but each was armed with 3 enormous curved claws that shimmered with a faint inner fire. They looked like they had been forged from obsidian and flame. "The talons of the mother," Elon declared, his voice ringing with power. "The only weapons that can harm the serpent." He looked at Caleb, the new wolf elder, and then at Borg, the champion of the bears. "You fought as rivals. Now you must fight as brothers." He handed one fiery talon to Caleb and the other to Borg. The two leaders locked eyes over the body of the ancient weapon, a new, unbreakable alliance forged in the face of annihilation. They equipped the talons which seemed to hum with power on their arms, and without a word they turned to face the monster that was tearing their world apart. The battle that followed was the stuff of grim legends. The entire village became a battlefield, with the colossal serpent that gnaws the world at its epicenter. The monster, the Yig Kral, moved with a terrifying grace, its massive body coiling and uncoiling, smashing longhouses to splinters with casual sweeps of its tail. Its shrieks were a physical force, shattering windows and shaking the very foundations of the earth. The remaining warriors of the people fought with desperate courage, a swarm of angry hornets attacking a dragon. They leaped onto its back, clawing and biting at its obsidian-hard scales, trying to distract the beast, to give their champions an opening. Caleb and Borg, armed with the talons of the mother, moved not as a wolf and a bear, but as a single, unified fighting force. Their old rivalry was burned away, replaced by the desperate instinct to protect their home. Borg, with his immense strength, became the shield. He would charge the great serpent, his werebear form a bulwark of muscle and fur, absorbing the monster's crushing blows and drawing its attention. Caleb, with his wolf's speed and agility, was the sword. He would use the openings Borg created, darting in to strike with the fiery claws of his talon. The talons of the mother were the only things that could harm the beast. Each time Caleb's claws raked across the serpent's hide, they left deep, smoldering gouges from which black, steaming ichor flowed instead of blood. The monster would scream in agony, its rage focusing on the small, fast-moving werewolf that was causing it such pain. I watched from the relative safety of the temple entrance, my friend Tom beside me, both of us paralyzed by the sheer scale of the conflict. "They have to win," Tom muttered, his voice trembling. "They have to." The Yggdrasil was intelligent. It began to ignore the smaller warriors, focusing all its terrifying power on the two who could actually hurt it. It whipped its tail in a low, devastating arc, catching Borg in the side and sending him flying through the wall of the communal cookhouse. The man-bear roared in pain, struggling to rise from the wreckage. With Borg down, the serpent's full attention turned to Caleb. It lunged, its massive jaws gaping wide, intending to swallow the wolf elder whole, just as it had swallowed the snake elder. But Borg was not done. With a furious roar, he burst from the debris, ignoring his injuries, and charged, leaping onto the serpent's back. He wrapped his powerful arms around its neck and dug the claws of his own talon deep into the creature's spine. The monster thrashed wildly, trying to shake the werebear from its back, its shrieks of pain deafening. The distraction was all Caleb needed. He saw his chance. The serpent's flailing had exposed the softer, paler scales of its underbelly. With a final, desperate war cry, Caleb launched himself forward, leaping high into the air. He brought his talon down with all his strength, driving the three fiery claws deep into the monster's throat. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. The great serpent froze, its body rigid. A low, guttural gurgle escaped its throat. Then, the fire from the talon seemed to erupt from within the wound, consuming it. The creature's obsidian eyes dimmed, and with a final shuddering sigh, the Yggdrasil crashed to the ground, its massive body shaking the village one last time before falling still. It was over. A weary, ragged cheer rose from the survivors. They had won. In the days that followed, the village slowly began to heal. The bodies of the fallen, wolf, bear, raccoon, and even the treacherous but ultimately duped snakes, were mourned and buried with honor. The wreckage of the longhouses was cleared, and the rebuilding began. The rivalry that had defined the people for so long had been replaced by a newfound unity, forged in the heat of battle. Caleb was confirmed as the new elder, with Borg, the bear champion, serving as his right hand. Their combined leadership brought a new era of cooperation and strength to the village. The heart of the mother was gone, destroyed in the hatching of their ancient enemy. But they had learned they didn't need a magical artifact. Their strength was in each other. My own place among them was solidified. I was no longer the suspicious outsider. I was the ally who had uncovered the plot, the friend who had stood with them when their world almost ended. The brand on my shoulder was no longer a mark of servitude, but a badge of honor. I didn't return to my old life, not really. I still went to school, still did my homework, but my world was so much larger now. Almost every day after school, I would walk the path into the woods, not as a visitor, but as someone coming home. I would help with the rebuilding, share meals in the Wolf Longhouse, and listen to Caleb and Borg plan the future of their people. I had stumbled into a secret world of monsters, and in doing so, I had found a second family. My life would never be simple again, but standing there among the werewolves and werebears, watching them raise a new village from the ashes, I knew I wouldn't have it any other way.